Schrodinger's cat was obviously written by a committee of nuclear physicists under the pen name Robert Anton Wilson, which he had never heard of before. He said no one quantum physicist could have written it. It had to be a consortium of them. That's the greatest review I ever got. He literally thought I was a quantum physicist. He thought I was a whole group of quantum physicists. That's definitely science fiction. How Illuminatus got published as science fiction, I don't know. Somebody at Dell had to decide how to package it. I suggested they should just advertise it as the greatest novel since Don Quixote. They didn't take me very seriously. But I think Don Quixote was a major influence too, by the way. Anyway, they published it as science fiction, and then I wrote Schrodinger's Cat, which was science fiction. Then I wrote Masks of the Illuminati, in which Einstein appears as a character, but it's definitely not science fiction. But by then my fans were used to looking for me in the science fiction shelf, so that's where all the bookstores put it. Then they started putting my nonfiction in the science fiction shelves too. And then I heard later they started moving me into the New Age section, which made me want to go and hide in a cave for a few years. And then I got the great news about a year ago that at least in one bookstore, Barnes & Noble in Philadelphia, I have been moved out of New Age into philosophy. So instead of being next to von Daniken, I'm next to Wittgenstein. I couldn't be happier. That's the best news since New Scientist thought I was a consortium of physicists.
What Shakespeare plays are you interested in?
Oh, all of them, but King Lear has always had a special power. I think Shakespeare's use of language definitely reached a peak somewhere around the years of Hamlet, Macbeth, King Lear, and Othello. And of the whole bunch, I like King Lear the best. I think the language is absolutely staggeringly beautiful in spite of the ugliness of the imagery. It's ugly and beautiful at the same time. Powerful. And I like the others I just mentioned, Hamlet, Othello, etc. And I love the history plays. I even like Henry VI, which everybody considers the least important of the history plays. But if you put the whole thing on in sequence, you start with Richard II and go right through Henry IV, Part 1 and 2, Henry V, Henry VI, and then Richard III. You get this panorama. I always compare it to Faulkner's Yoknepatorfa County novels. It's like every character seems important and then disappears, and new character, and you know, the thing goes on over a period of 300 years. Faulkner's Yoknepatorfa novels only cover about 140 years, but that kind of epic scope I really like, if the writer is good enough. Everything by Faulkner I've read at least twice, and some of them I've read 3 or 4 times.
Isn't that one of the things you're doing in the historical Illuminatus trilogy?
Well, yeah, well, all of my novels do, if I ever get around to writing the missing volumes, will have a continuous story beginning in 1766 in Naples, and ending in the year 20-something, I don't know, in a space colony. Because a lot of the same families, the Babcocks, keep popping up throughout the series. The Chileans keep popping up. The Wilderbloods appear now and then. The Moons or Moons keep showing up. And so I got my own world moving in parallel to real history. There's my imaginary history, which keeps interacting with real history. My favorite, by the way, is The Widow's Son, because by the time I finished that, I was absolutely convinced, and I remain persuaded, that nobody, not even me, can tell how much of that is true and how much of it I invented. And I think if you got 10 historians to go over the book line by line, they'd all viciously disagree with one another. That's a technique I learned from H.P. Lovecraft, mixing fact and fiction in a way that gets the reader to wonder, Jesus, maybe even the worst parts of this are true. I learned that from Lovecraft. I gave it a humorous twist in Illuminatus. I give it a sinister twist in some of my other books, but I like keeping the reader uncertain as to how much of this you should believe. That's because I'm not so sure about how much I should believe about what I read in the papers or see on television. I don't believe much of what I read in the papers or see on television. I don't believe much of what I see out my window either, for that matter. I one time shocked the hell out of Bob Shea by saying I see 3 or 4 UFOs a week, and he looked at me like, my God, you have finally gone nuts. And I said, well, what the hell? I've been trained in general semantics for over 40 years. I'm not quick to identify things. Most of the things that go by in the sky are unidentified. It's where I don't know what they are. They could be satellites, they could be airplanes, they could be spaceships, they could be sundogs, they could be swamp gas. I'm not sure. But for that matter, I see at least 10 UNFOs every week. That's unidentified, non-flying objects. Things go by out there. I don't know what the hell they are. I'm just not quick to identify things. I'm uncertain about almost everything, including my own uncertainty. But again, that comes back to my fascination with Taoism. One text in the Tao Te Ching says, everybody else is full of robust certitude. I alone am tentative. At least that's one translation of the Tao Te Ching. I've read about 20, and they all disagree with one another.
Besides writers, what thinkers do you feel have influenced you the most?
Alfred Korzybski, definitely in first place. I read Korzybski when I was about 18, and then I reread him several times in my 20s when I was first learning to smoke pot. And reading Korzybski on pot is absolutely the best way to read him. Every general semanticist in the country is going to hate me for saying that, but Korzybski's basic thesis is that all perception is co-creation. The brain is the center of our consciousness, but the consciousness is all over the body. He hardly ever uses the word brain. He keeps talking about the nervous system. We are evaluating with our whole nervous system all the time. Our whole organism is involved in the process of creating the environment we think we are perceiving. I'm not saying we're making it up out of whole cloth. We're making it up out of signals we receive, but we make it up to suit our own intents and our own dogmas, if we have dogmas, our own emotion, our own aesthetics even. And everybody lives in a different universe. And reading that on pot, it was easy to understand. A lot of people can't understand Korzybski, and I always tell them, well, read him while you're stoned, and then you begin to understand. And one of the main things I got from Korzybski was, I call it neurological relativism. I forget when I coined that term. But it's parallel to Einstein's instrumental relativism. Every nervous system perceives a different universe. And at my workshops, I have various ways of demonstrating this. I have people describe the hall they came through to get into the seminar room, and no two people describe it exactly alike. I've never had a case where two people in the class describe the same hall. And sometimes the differences are quite astonishing. Then I have listening experiments where they all listen. They all hear different sounds, which is partly because they're in different parts of the room, but it's also because we're attuned to different sounds depending on our life history, our education, and probably our genetics even. And anyway, we're all living in our own worlds that we created, made up out of some common stuff that's common to all of us, so we wouldn't be able to communicate at all. But most of the defects of communication, according to Korzybski, are caused by the fact we think everybody's living in the same world with us. And when we find out they're not, we think they're either crazy or evil, they're either mad or bad. And learning to accept neurological relativism, I think, is one of the great liberating discoveries of the 20th century. And it's not just in Korzybski. It's been discovered over and over again under various labels. But Korzybski put it, I think, in the best terms. And the other thing I got from Korzybski of tremendous importance, I got many things, but the second one I want to mention right now, the concept of time binding, which is that language allows information to accumulate more and more rapidly as time passes. Now that's a commonplace thought, but when Korzybski wrote it in 1933, it was a totally unexpected thought, and he was attacked by the evolutionists for